Hello, welcome back to the channel. It is Dan, Nocturne Knives, coming at you today with a quick first impressions video of this knife, the Benchmade Redoubt. I have this one in from the Apex pass-around group. Thank you very much to those friends. And I've had it for a few days, ready to give some first impressions on it, put it through a little use, carried it. Definitely an interesting knife. So with all that said, let's get into it. First, we'll talk about the materials on this one. So for the handle, we have some sort of FRN plastic. They might call it Grivery. Everyone has their own name for this kind of stuff, but fancy plastic, basically. On the blade end, you have CPM D2 on the blade. I think these are steel, probably coated thumb studs, and then you have a gray Cerakote on the blade here. Clip is stainless, deep carry mounted off the end, and it is reversible. And then you have an axis lock for your lockup. Get a few specs out of the way here. So overall length is coming in at just about 8¼ inches, maybe 8 1/3. Blade length is coming in right about 3.5, and then cutting edge is just under 3.5, maybe 3 3/8 of an inch approximately. Get some caliper measurements on here. Handle is coming in definitely on the chunky side at 0.62. Blade stock is coming in at 0.12. And then your behind the edge thickness is coming in at about 16 thousandths or so. Yeah, just about 16 thousandths. And Benchmades are usually sharpened at around 17 or 18 degrees per side. This edge looks to be pretty similar, so I'm going to guess that's what it is. Under 20 degrees per side. So that's a pretty reasonable behind the edge thickness. I don't know the weight off the top of my head for this. It's pretty light though. I'm gonna say it's about 3, maybe 3.5 ounces at the most. I'll put it on screen, but very, very light handle. You can see the balance point is even ahead of where your index finger is gonna lay right here. So it does feel slightly blade heavy actually, even with it having such a big handle. And with that out of the way, let's get into my likes, neutrals, and dislikes for this knife. So to start off with the likes, I like the action and the build quality on this knife. Pretty good, generally. Flick it out, release the lock, blade usually falls back into the handle just like that. It's very smooth, very smooth. The detent on this is not bad as far as axis lock detents go. It's similar to Griptilian, maybe slightly snappier. Not as snappy as something like a 940, but very easy to deploy, and you can also get middle finger and do that. It's definitely harder, but it is doable. And then of course the thumb roll is quite easy. The axis lock feels very smooth on this one, very well made. Even with one hand, even with one finger, it's very smooth to operate. It doesn't feel gritty like some Benchmade axis locks do. You can easily do that. You have just a hint of side-to-side blade play, just a little bit, but nothing up and down, and it's pretty minor. If you just softly wiggle it, you won't feel anything, but you give it more of a wiggle, you do get just slight movement side to side, but the action is very nice. I think you could tighten it just slightly more and have a little bit less free dropping, but I think you'd have totally solid lockup then. My next like on this one is the blade. I like a lot of things they're doing with the blade here. First, I like the thumb studs. I like their color. They're nice and shiny. It's a nice contrast to the matte dark gray of the blade. Looks really good. Secondly, I like the coating on this. It feels nice. It has some texture to it. It's not just totally smooth. It has some nice texture to it. It's got a little bit of sparkle. It looks really good. I think it's a very nice color. Very nice color and finish on here. I like the swedge up top. Gives it just a little bit of extra interest in the look of it. And then it's a pretty thin blade stock coming in at about 1/8 of an inch, which for a knife this large overall is pretty respectable. And then the really nice part is the grind on this. It has a wonderful grind coming in well under 20 thousandths behind the edge, about 16, 17 thousandths. That's excellent for a knife of this size and kind of with this design. You can see the tip gets just a little bit thicker and more robust out there, but this main part of the grind, you might be able to see it like that, is nice and thin, nice and slicey. Put this through some cardboard and it whizzes through cardboard. It's wonderful to cut with. It really is a fantastic blade. And then my last like on this is the overall build quality. It seems like Benchmade has built this one pretty well and QC'd it pretty well. Even sharpened it pretty decently. I think we all know by now Benchmade's reputation with quality control and some spotty manufacturing tolerances. This one made quite well though. This axis lock is really smooth and easy to use. The blade is ground nicely and even sharpened pretty decently. You can see it's not exactly a refined edge, but it is pretty even all the way back and from side to side, and it's pretty decently sharp. So there are my likes. On to some neutrals. I've only got one neutral for this knife, and it is the blade steel choice. CPM D2 is an interesting choice. I've never personally seen that on another knife, at least that I've had in my possession. I don't really have any experience with it. I've had experience with D2, but not CPM D2. From what I've read and seen, they are quite different beasts. CPM D2 is a significant improvement over regular D2, but it seems a strange choice on a knife that is this expensive, because it's definitely not a cheap knife. I'll put the price up in the top left corner of the screen. Can't remember it off my head. I want to say it's $200 or something like that. For a knife that expensive, I would probably expect a more premium blade steel. Something like Crew Wear or CPM 20CV, something like that. CPM D2 is a strange choice, but perhaps with more experience with it, I would learn that it's a wonderful steel and is actually a great choice for this knife. I honestly don't know quite enough about it to comment on it. That's why it's a neutral, and that's my only one there. Now on to the dislikes. And I do have some dislikes for this. First, it's too expensive, as are most Benchmades. It should probably be about 10 to 20% less expensive based on the materials and the build quality, but that is what you get with a Benchmade, the classic butterfly tax. My next dislike is how thick this thing is. It's really chunky, and that gives it some solid ergos in some ways, but it just becomes really thick in your pocket. It's big and rounded and thick, and it's a rather large object to be putting in your pocket. At the very least, it is fairly narrow this way. The blade tucks into the handle quite nicely, but it's real thick, so it's kind of a pocket hog. Next, this clip, I think it needs more ramp up here and a little more clearance to be able to get over thicker pockets. This seems like it's designed as a work knife, so I would think it's probably sliding into thicker, more reinforced pockets quite often and would need a clip that has more clearance for your pocket. My next dislike is the plastic handle. I've mentioned this in several videos. I don't like the Radley plastic handle. Definitely not my preference. At the very least, this one is pretty stiff. You can see not easy to squeeze. It's because it's so thick, but I really don't like the way it feels. And that takes us on to my biggest dislike, which are the ergos associated with this plastic handle. Now, the shape on this knife is pretty good. It's a very neutral broomstick-like shape, pretty solid. I don't love the way it flares out at the back and gets narrower at the front. I think it kind of puts your hand in a slightly strange position where these fingers are higher up than these fingers. So that's a little bit weird, but my number one complaint with it is there's crazy texture all over this thing. You have grooves here where your index finger goes, and these are the most neutral of the plastic texturing on here. They're decently dull, but they are still a little sharp, especially on the inside. They have a sharp edge to them. Next, you have this checkering over the entire thing, which is actually pretty aggressive. It really doesn't actually feel very nice when it's in your hand. I'll show you if I press it into my hand like that. You can see that those textures, that texture is left on my actual hand right there. Yeah, there you go. Not very comfortable. And then the worst of all are these grooves back here that are legitimately quite sharp. When you go to bear down on this thing, it just digs into these two fingers. I'll show you. I'll squeeze down here, and you can see all that texturing has left these imprints on my hand, and it's genuinely quite uncomfortable to actually squeeze and bear down on this knife. And that's a problem because these chimps here are right where your hand is going to be getting a lot of pressure. Say you're cutting into something, pushing the blade back, it pushes this part of the handle forward, relies on these fingers to keep it back in your hand. So you're squeezing and putting a lot of pressure through that part of the knife where it is the sharpest. Ironically, the only really smooth jimping is up here on the liners, and that's where you actually might want a little bit more traction for more detailed work right here. But that's fine. I don't honestly want any of this jimping to be sharp. Now, this might not be a huge deal for you if you're using gloves all the time while you're using this knife, which is, I think, what it's more designed for. This is designed to be a real working knife, real user. Take this to the job site, put it through a lot of cutting, a lot of hard cutting, use it a lot with gloves on. If you're using this thing a lot without gloves on, you're really going to be tearing up your hand. You can see here, still, got these nice marks in my fingers from that sharp jimping, just holding it for a few seconds. Really is that aggressive. You put gloves on, it's going to be great. It's really going to keep it in your hand with gloves. But that's not how I'm using my knives the vast majority of the time, and I don't think it's how most people are using their knives the vast majority of the time. And the issue with designing a knife to be used with gloves a lot and really put in the work is that while this thing does have hard working materials, that CPM D2 and the plastic handle can be nice and tough and hard wearing, it's still an expensive knife. It's coming in at a very high price point for those materials. So a lot of people, I think, are going to be hesitant to take this onto the job site or whatever, where they may be really using it hard because of the high price. You're going to put cheap, hard wearing materials on a knife. You got to make it cheap. This one just isn't. So it's a bit of a conundrum there where it seems like it's made to be used hard with gloves on, but then it's using those kind of materials, but then it's not really priced accordingly. And the price this thing does have means I would want different materials on it. The only upside to this handle, this plastic handle, is it becomes super, super light. This knife is amazingly light. It feels like a feather in your hand. It's incredibly light, and you can see that with the balance point here. How even this thin, light blade is making the knife slightly blade heavy. It's the only redeeming factor, in my opinion, for the plastic handles. And those are all my thoughts about this knife. I like some parts of it, mainly the blade. Has a really nice blade with a really nice grind, finished very well, and it's generally made well. But this handle is a total letdown for me. I kind of think it's garbage, honestly. Far too sharp jimping. The plastic doesn't look nice. It doesn't feel nice. I really hate all this texturing. Handle is not done well, in my opinion. You want to make this knife good? Get it and then slap a pair of Applied Weapons Tech scales on it. That's, I think, the only way you're really going to make this a good knife is you totally get rid of the handle equation, keep the great blade, and put some good Applied Weapons Tech scales on it. The only problem with that is you're investing nearly $300 into your knife, and it's honestly not got the materials or the quality to live up to nearly $300 of investment, in my opinion. It's also kind of a boring design. Pretty boring drop point, boring plastic handle. Nothing really exciting going on here at all. Benchmade is doing their classic, incredibly safe design work that they charge a premium for. And I don't love it here. Alright, those are my thoughts on this knife. What do you think about this one? Have you picked one of these up? Did you pass on it? You got some of those Applied Weapons Tech scales? I would love to know what you think. Go drop a comment down below. While you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button and that subscribe button if you like knives, sharpening, content, all that kind of stuff. And with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.